Hello, and welcome to the Times Higher Education webinar, Research Transformation, Embracing Change in the Era of AI, held in partnership with Digital Science. My name is Sridhu. I'm the Deputy Editor for Grant Content at Times Higher Education. External pressures from an increasingly complex world are driving rapid and transformative changes in research, but rising expectations, shrinking budgets, and inadequate infrastructure can stand in the way of progress. In this webinar, we'll discuss the key findings from the Digital Science Report, Research Transformation, Change in the Era of AI, Open and Impact, and the evolving role of researchers today and the support they need to better navigate an AI-driven world. Before we begin, I would like to mention that this webinar is being recorded. We'll share an on-demand video and a summary article with all the participants after the webinar. We'll also be taking questions from the audience, so please use the Q&A function to post any questions you would like to ask the panel. I will now introduce our expert panelists, who are Mark Hannell, Vice President of Open Research at Digital Science and founder of Picshare, Marcus Michaela, Head of AI at LUT University, Sally Smith, Director of Research at Trinity College Dublin, and Simon Porter, Vice President of Research Futures at Digital Science. Thank you all for joining us. I'll now hand over to our panelists from Digital Science for their presentation and tell us a little bit about the key findings from their report on research transformation. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Srithu. Hi, everybody. I am going to start with a 10-minute presentation to talk you through the findings that we got from our report. So we did a survey of those in research-associated roles globally, and we did some in-depth interviews to try and understand how we see the changes of the last 5 years and what we anticipate going forward are going to be the big things that we should keep our eyes on. We try to understand where the career is evolving to, and I think it's very useful for people working in the industry to see what their peers are saying, what they think the problems are going to be, what the opportunities are going to be, and that's what we're going to dig into here. So there is a QR code here where you can go and grab the report yourself. It's got a lot more data than I'll present, but probably not as much context and flavor as you'll get from this presentation right now with the discussion with our experts. And it's this trying to understand the external pressures from an increasingly complex world, which are forcing change in the sector. And obviously, the era of AI, open, and impact are three of the big topics that we pulled out. There is a couple more as well that I'll dig into now. But with every one of these different sections, there's a lot of depth. There's differences from region to region. There's differences in interpretation, and there's differences in levels of training support for executing on some of these changes. But if you are in a role that we talk about, it'd be very interesting to hear how you see the shape of your career and whether you see the effect that you can have on the industry through some of the things we discuss. So that QR code is there. I'll pull it back up at the end. So just to run through the 5 big findings that we found, and I'll dig into these a little bit deeper. So you may have heard at the beginning, my job title is VP of Open Research. I love open research. So open research is transforming research. Great news. I'm happy to, it's not biased, I promise. But barriers remain. So 82% of respondents said that open research advancements will have the most impact on research over the next 5 years. So it's going to be a big thing in terms of the impact on research, but that can mean many different things. Research metrics are evolving to emphasize holistic impact and inclusivity. Again, different conversations in different countries. In the UK, where I'm based, we have the REF and you have impact statements, but that's not true around the world. 77% of respondents expect to spend more time on research impact and evaluation over the next 5 years. It wouldn't be a talk which shows the magnitude of the change that's happening today without mentioning AI. AI's transformative potential is huge, but bureaucracy and skill gaps threaten progress. So 69% of respondents stated that skill gaps are having an extremely high or moderate impact on their role today. And yeah, we'll dig into that a little bit more. We have some great experts to talk about that. Collaboration is booming, but increasing concerns over funding and security. 45% of respondents report an increase in the amount of time they spend on research security compared now to 5 years ago. And the fifth point, take-home point, is that security and risk management need a strategic and cultural overhaul. So 58% of respondents expect to spend more time today than 5 years ago on research security. That played throughout, and that is the one message that I think I was most shocked to see in the report. So on to what I see as the biggest positive. So open research was cited as the most positive change in the last 5 years, and open research is the top change the community would like to see in the next 5 years. So I think there's a big question mark around have we got past this now? Is everything just moving to open? It's good to see there's still enthusiasm that it is the top change the community would like to see. But again, challenges, lack of awareness, funding, support, resources, infrastructure, all those things that there's never enough of. And concerns around data security, research quality, and competitiveness. So that's an interesting one, mentioning research security that seems to play throughout this. And actually, all of our topics play throughout this. So you can read the quotes faster than I can, but top left, there's reference to security. Top right, governance and incentive systems. So metrics is important in incentive systems. And at the bottom there, AI related to open science. So you can see there's 5 take-home messages, 5 themes, but they're all very much intertwined. The research metrics are evolving to emphasize holistic impact and inclusivity. And the terminology at the beginning, I found this a bit difficult to really grasp what it was trying to say. But I think it's, one size doesn't fit all here. There needs to be greater recognition for non-traditional contributions, and traditional metrics are good, but they're not the only thing. And so just how many times you're publishing in a high impact journal is not the be all and end all, and is a system that I think people are moving past. So I won't mention we have Sally quoted here, but there's a very welcome emphasis on research culture and open research. But there is, in the top quote here, we are bound to chasing the bad traditional metrics for international students to fund the research that we should be doing in a transparent manner. So the finances is always something that needs to come into play. In terms of just something completely out of left field, we all knew about AI. We didn't know the impact it would have and how transformative it has been. And I think, 69% of respondents stated they have skills gaps. There's mentions of AI bias, hallucinations, and impact on critical thinking. And I am going to quote you here, Sally, with the AI is right there. I have no idea what's going to happen there. I think a lot of people think like this. There is I know it's here and I need to know more. And then there's the other side of people. So yeah, freaky and awful, or that it's great and there's so many good tools. And I think that's exactly what we heard from everybody. There was a gradient, a bell curve of I'm kind of over here or I'm over here, but we all know it's going to be important. So hopefully we can hear more from Marcus on that. Number 4, collaboration is booming. We know collaboration is important. We want interdisciplinary collaboration. We want international collaboration. We know that it increases citations. There's good data on that. And interestingly, 80% of respondents believe collaboration outside of academia is changing the way research is performed. That was interesting to me. Again, increased concerns around research security and damaging collaborations. That is something that wasn't a thing for me 5 years ago. People have said, in my world, as just the opinion of one, I didn't see research security coming up in open science conversations. I see it in every topic now. And as it pops up in collaboration. But interestingly, again, as well as security, but there's also mention of money. This great quote at the top right here, do we have trouble finding partners? Partners with money? Yes. Partners for research? I don't think so. It comes down to the funding. And so everyone wants to do more collaborations, more international collaborations will get you more citations, but who pays? How do you organize all of that is the big one. And finally, as I've mentioned throughout all the shocker for me, security and risk management need a strategic and cultural overhaul. Things move globally in the macroeconomic climate, and what's happening with different countries doing different things. And, you know, the cultural change necessary remains challenging. If you go back 4 or 5 years, for example, we were still in the golden era of UK-China relations and are now having to reassess what was at the time encouraged by government and has resulted in various complex and strategic relationships. That's Chris Buckland from Cranfield University. So I think that is one UK-based opinion, and we have an international set of results. But I think that highlights that things change and security is very high on the agenda these days. So in terms of some questions to wet your whistle before we hear from questions for ourselves from Srithu, if you do have any questions, please put them into the chat box and we'll get to them at the end. But I won't read all of these, but what research should generative AI consume? Preprints is a changing world. We see with eLife and getting delisted from Web of Science and losing an impact factor, what effect that will have. And at the bottom here, how can we balance the goal of diverse open research with increasing concerns over research security and international collaborations? So some really interesting topics to discuss. And hopefully that has wetted your whistle for hearing more from the rest of our speakers. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Srithu. I'm going to leave this up for one more second if anybody would like to get the report, but I'll stop sharing in 1 second.
Thank you so much. Going back to your presentation, I wanted to start with the question, is the movement towards open research inevitable? And what are the key drivers behind the shift? And if you could, we could start with you, Mark, that would be great.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I'm biased. When I came out of academia around 2011, 2012, open access publications amongst my peers was still had a, it wasn't, there was some unsubstantiated rumors or conversations that open access wasn't as impactful as closed access publications or lower quality. And I think we've got past that. Globally in 2017, we went past, there is more open access publications by default than there are closed access publications. So for me, open access is an inevitability. We will get to 95% of publications being made open access. Everything, there's a limit to everything that something shouldn't be made open as possible, as closed as necessary, or as restricted as necessary. And my own particular focus has been on open data since then, open academic data, which is a new one, but the National Institute of Health has a mandate that says you have to make your data openly available in order to, at the point at which you publish your papers, in order to get funding from us. And I think that's a big change because it's a big funder, but globally we see that from most of the big funders globally. So I personally think open research is an inevitability, and I personally think it will only be exacerbated by the rise of AI and the need for AI to consume information. But 2 Nobel Prizes were won a month ago based on open research and open data. But I think that just because it's an inevitability doesn't mean it's a done deal, and doesn't mean that we won't have a lot of things to work through to get there.
Thank you. Sally, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting point about whether it will be inevitable or not. I think the answer, I think it depends a great deal about where you are in the world. And I think it depends a great deal on what aspect of open research you're looking at. I mean, I do agree with Mark. I think there are some things around open access that the practices around open access and policies that funders and governments have are based on arguments that will be very hard to unsee, if you know what I mean, like the things that have made open access such a success, I think are very unlikely to be reversed because the arguments feel really watertight. I guess I agree as well that things like public engagement, engaging with the beneficiaries of research, engaging with a range of publics, I think are very unlikely to go back in the bottle because they have become a real part and a lived reality of a lot of researchers' experience. But I do think that other aspects of open research are less inevitable. I think open data, it's great when funders do what Mark described there, but if you live in an ecosystem in which that is not, the infrastructure is not there for open data, I think you will see the resourcing required for that create a bit of a patchwork around, that aspect of open research. And I certainly, my main area of interest is really in research assessment, responsible research assessment. And I think that is still highly contested. I mean, I think even the fundamental principles of responsible research assessment are still contested in the academy. And I do think that if we look at the entire agenda, bits appear to be so far down the line, and the fundamental arguments in favour of them are so accepted that, yep, I think inevitable is a reasonable term, but certainly not for all.
Thank you. Simon?
I just actually reflecting on something that Sally said in the pre-meeting about the open access change. Reflecting on what actually changed, was it the researchers that changed, or was it the infrastructure around researchers that changed? And I suspect with open research, it's the infrastructure. So it's the funding infrastructure, it's the repositories, it's the policies of the journals, it's the ability to pay for gold access. But the researchers themselves, as Sally observed, are still publishing in the same journals. They're still doing research in the same way, but we've all worked together to create a supportive infrastructure around research that pushes the outputs into open access when it comes to publishing. And I think picking up from what you were saying with open data, that's only going to be the case if we do something similar in that space and provide that supportive infrastructure.
I mean, if I might just quickly come back, I mean, I do think there's an interesting dichotomy between open research as sort of behaviour that is facilitated and so researchers do, and open research practices that are the result of hearts and mind changes, like actual research culture changes. And I agree that I do think a lot of the open access falls into the former category. I do think people are publishing, okay, that's the rule. I either have money for it or not, an APC or not, or I stick it in a repository or not, on I go. But I do think the open agenda, broadly conceived, has been transformational in some aspects of research culture. And by research culture, I guess I mean what researchers do, right? I mean, there's the Royal Society definition, which is useful. And I would put stuff around public engagement research, research impact. I do think that is part of open, and I do think that is a result of research culture change. And I also actually think interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary behaviours are part of open and part of collaboration and reflect a real research culture change. But again, there's a patchwork. What's there, what's happening because it's been constructed for researchers and they're kind of okay with it, and what is a result of sort of more meaningful change within the academy.
Just to stay with you, Sally, for a minute, can you perhaps identify some of the most significant changes that you have witnessed in research culture over the past decade, especially with regard to openness?
I haven't actually been in this world for a whole decade because I'm obviously extremely youthful, but I guess, yeah, I mean, the responsible research assessment regime, which I think is obviously linked to open scholarship and open research broadly conceived, is a really fundamental change. As I said, it is not accepted broadly necessarily everywhere. It is still contested, but I think the idea that The idea that the sort of Platonic ideal of research output is an article in a so-called prestige journal, I think has genuinely become problematized within research environments. I mean, not everybody would say that it doesn't still mean something, but I think there is a sense that those researchers who are doing other stuff like creating excellent collaborative cultures, excellent research leadership. There's some wonderful, great project going on at the University of Glasgow, I believe, about how do you actually count and look at collegiality in leadership. Very high engagement with impact, as Mark said, a lot of that driven in the UK by the REF, elsewhere driven by the European Union. And so I think there is something around what people consider to be good research, which is slowly changing. And I think elements of that for the next generation of researchers will go without question. But I do also think there are some bits that are more vulnerable. And I actually do even think open access is one of them, right? Is that if the infrastructure melted away, as it were, I do not think necessarily there would be a few true advocates. But I do think that's less embedded perhaps in people's actual mindsets. But I do think this idea of, the big professor who publishes lots of stuff in Nature, despite the fact that he may be, this is obviously a terrible cliche, a terrible bully or whatever, is no longer considered to be, that's fine because the work is great. I do think we're questioning what good quality research looks like.
Mm-hmm. I'm also curious how research metrics are evolving in reaction to these changes. You mentioned quality. So can you talk about the need for redesigning the traditional metrics to achieve a more holistic evaluation of research impact and quality?
I mean, I think there's a huge amount of literature and thinking around this, all of which I think a lot of which I think is incredibly important. And I used to work in the UK system. I look at what they're doing around REF and people, culture, environment as being very much at the edge, at the leading edge of this, because while there is a necessity to look broadly away from pure publication metrics, looking at how research is done as an integral part of the research quality. What is quality? Do we really need to be looking, properly in depth at people's outputs and not just at metrics which, are demonstrably not really equated to anything we might naturally think of as quality? I do think there's great work being done in the UK about how that can be looked at systematically. But in the Irish sector, for example, the thinking is somewhat less advanced. And I would consider, I see it as a very sort of mixed picture within the Irish environment, where certainly there's an understanding that the old metrics, as it were, particularly journal level metrics, perhaps are not robust, but there would still not be an absolute understanding that they may be like completely unreliable. And there is not necessarily a sense that there are other ways we could do stuff. So again, I think that there is a lot of literature that makes it really clear that things like journal level metrics are really problematic, but there's a very mixed picture in terms of what replaces that.
Thank you. Simon or Mark, what are you seeing over at Digital Science with regard to how research metrics are evolving?
We've certainly, within Digital Science, been trying to evolve the story over a long period of time. So I remember starting at Digital Science in 2015. Altmetric was fairly new there, and the discussions even way back then were, how can we use signals with Altmetric to demonstrate pathways to impact? So where is the knowledge going through news articles, through blogs, through tweets? How can we demonstrate new pathways to that? We have not stopped there in investigating different ways of exploring that sort of information. So very interested in being able to rethink about, say, bibliometric databases and think them as more of a research graph. And so how do you interrogate the graph to tell stories about interactions between the global north and the global south? How do we improve our classification systems so that they're not internally reflecting the research that we do, but the impact and the problems that we're focusing on? So we, along with many companies, have focused on trying to classify our research into SDGs. So making, I guess, earlier use of natural language processing techniques to try and look at the paper and work out which of these SDGs does this paper address? And so that takes us a little bit further down the path of telling those stories. But I wouldn't say we know all the answers, but we're deeply interested in how we can use all of the information we have to surface stories that are not that don't end in a performance measure, but end in an articulation of value of what research is actually achieving. I think that's the goal with everything that we do.
I think that's exactly it. I think there's this articulation of value, and one size doesn't fit all for researchers. Most people in the space are aware of this, but they've got to play with what they have. And so we're very much in the industry of helping researchers be able to quantify value and impact in a way that can be backed up. I'm not just saying my research is having this impact. I can back it up using data, and whether that data is things like altmetrics or allowing people to disseminate more outputs and have more measures of those outputs. I think it's that. The hard part is the other side of it. How do funders capture that information in a way that's consistent, because they want one size fits all for all the hard work you can do in generating a plethora of information that demonstrates value. You can get a golden visa for Saudi Arabia if you have a H index of 10. It's easy. It's easy to understand, right?
If I may just jump in just on that, I do think we are seeing some creative solutions from a lot of funders in the form of the narrative-based or evidence-based CV. And I think there's been some really excellent work on getting researchers to trust that. So one of the things that I first encountered when I was trying to introduce narrative-based, or I believe a better nomenclature is evidence-based CV, is that researchers felt that the evaluators wouldn't necessarily understand how to engage with that form of presentation of material. And I think there's been a lot of work done, and there's a plethora of material which provides enough guidance to give people, I think, real assurance that what they're writing will be read in the right way. I mean, there are a different set of problems that narrative CVs do introduce, things around genre and trope, things around text, things around who writes well, etc. But I do think that a lot of funders are moving away from a very simplistic use of metrics, but whether or not national regimes are doing that, national research assessment regimes are doing that, is more open to question, I think.
Thank you. Taking a step back to the changes to research culture that we were talking about and research transformation, I'm curious how much of these changes are prompted by AI. And Marcus, if I could come to you next, what do you see as the most significant ways AI is transforming research landscape today? And what is the transformative role that AI can play in making research more open and inclusive and collaborative?
Well, AI's role can be really multifaceted, I think, and I actually mostly myself, as a head of AI of our university, when talking with researchers and faculties and departments, I mostly tend to look at it from the viewpoint of the research process of the individual researcher, and that's how I'm probably best at conceptualizing it myself. And there I think that AI has so much to do as a tool of ideating. So that's probably the biggest thing, and actually a very, very significant thing. You could use it in so many ways, Gen AI, for ideating anything from your research question to which kinds of theories would be needed as a basis for that, which in the social sciences, of course, might be far less clear at the outset than in the natural sciences. And you could have AI question your early ideas and suggest why they might be good or bad ideas and what to suggest to those. You could have it do drafts of literature reviews for yourself for the purpose of learning the contents for, I mean, like for PhD students, that would help obviously, but also for more seasoned scholars, you could easily want literature reviews of things that are kind of adjacent or nearly adjacent to your research question in that you have in mind. You could have it comment on your choices of research methods, which again, particularly in research in social sciences, but in natural sciences too, and formal sciences, might be something where you could need other things, other kind of parties to critique your ideas than just your colleagues. And one partner that could be easily available always going forward would be AI, of course. And you can do so much with that. You can also, after you have received your results, for which you might also use AI, at least when it comes to analyzing qualitative data, where you can speed up phases, although you have to be responsible of the outcome, but you can kind of speed up some more mundane phases as long as you check things and know how things have happened. Then you get to your results in the end. And again, I seem to be often wanting to talk about the social sciences, and there, when you have the results, it's not always so obvious that which all theories they should or could connect with, and which all manifestations or rather the ramifications of your research you should be discussing and mentioning, and how, and before you submit your paper, after discussing with colleagues, of course, like previously, before you submit, you might want to get some further critique at that time, and help it to really improve things, and maybe even anticipate the particular kinds of comments that could come from the reviewers of a particular scholar, particular outlet that you are aiming towards. So there's really much to do in that respect. And I mostly look at it from the viewpoint of individual researchers or research groups, and this is how I kind of like to conceptualize that. And you could also use AI, of course, to produce snippets and drafts of texts. And particularly what I like to do is that when I've written text already for a submission, I might ask it to improve the readability of that text. But I would be quite hesitant in using the actual output of the AI, because there can pretty easily be research ethical problems with that. And I always tend to say to the scholars of our university that be sure that you have checked the guidelines that their target journal happens to have, or their target conference happens to have for that, and check it right now, because it might be different from what they had half a year ago, to check that what particular use of AI they allow, if it's not just for ideating or commenting, but actually using some of the text or stuff that it produces. Then I think it becomes really important to be careful about how much and where and how you use it. So those are some of my thoughts. And then looking a bit from a different perspective as a reviewer in outlets like journals, then it's also very useful, of course, to have a quick glance, and particularly to say about bad manuscripts that those should be maybe desk rejected to the editor, and but otherwise to give a quick guidance to the reviewers about where they should be mostly focusing on. And so there, like in many cases, I think Gen AI would not do everything, that's for sure, but it would give a rapid start and get the work of the reviewer kind of started up fast. So there are really many things, if I look at these things from my typical research process perspective, that can be done. But there are also problems which I might in my work mostly look at from the viewpoint of research ethics, which is, of course, this kind of big topic that keeps being developing, and there are gray areas there where people really need to be careful, I think.
Thank you very much for that detailed answer. Mark, your thoughts on that?
I just wanted to follow up with Marcus directly and ask him, you mentioned kind of the different ways in which AI can be intertwined into the research process, and it seems that every step there's something that can be done. You mentioned the more monotonous, I think, parts that you can speed up, and I think everybody wants to do that. I was wondering, when it comes to the results of the survey and the report, that there is this, there's the people who are there's the people who are super deep into it, who are doing, protein folding using AlphaFold. And then there's the people who are starting to use these tools on an everyday basis, which is more, I think, where you were talking. And then there's the folks who are still a bit, I don't know where to start. And while it does sound good what you're saying about speeding up processes and getting reviews, it seems like we're kind of in the explosion of tools, and we'll see each of them evolve, and then people just waiting to see, okay, well, now I'll just use this for this and this for this, instead of testing out 20 different tools for my one particular thing. Do you think we're already, is that naive? Do you think we're already at the point where researchers particularly can be using specific tools to get going now, and even if they feel like it's a bit early and they want to see the dust settle and the ethics all get sorted out with publications, do you think it's better for them to wait, or do you think there is ways in which they can onboard themselves today?
I may not be able to comment about very specific applications like AlphaFold, for example, and I'm not a natural scientist, but it seems that for exploratory research, some such applications for natural sciences might be really useful and really like speed up development of pharmaceuticals and stuff like that very much. But I'm mostly to do, as you might have noticed, with, and as you commented, with these kind of very general tools for that might be applicable for a researcher in any area in particular. And I think that you can use a lot in those things. And that's partly because I think that at least currently, maybe even going years forward, the biggest use in terms of time and maybe contribution from AI to me seems to be to create better ideas. Because pretty much of the work that a researcher does in various phases there are those mundane parts, but there are also pretty much of those parts where when one needs to do kind of higher level thinking and also actually use creativity, such as in those cases when a social scientist wouldn't be totally sure if this and these and these kind of adjacent theories should also be incorporated into some hypothesis or into the interpretation of the eventual results if it's deductive research. So I think there's pretty much that can be used. And in our university, we mostly talk about a lot, but mostly we talk about general tools, kind of advanced chatbots, could be advanced versions of just ChatGPT for things, but we also talk about functionalities where we use office type productivity software, and we are buying licenses for software to work inside of those programs and therefore make it easier to produce Word documents or just manage the everyday practicalities of a researcher, such as managing emails or managing Teams meetings or stuff like that. So I think that at least those tools tend to be quite far advanced now. I mean, it might not be much compared with where they are going forward 5 years, but I would say that even now they do tend to create quite significant productivity advantages indeed for those people who are motivated in using those and have learned to use those and hopefully gotten also training for those, unless they are people who like to look at video training and find out things for themselves. So fairly many people at our university are using and starting to use those, and at least those kind of general productivity tools tend to be valuable. But then when we go to AlphaFold and some other things that are geared for very specific applications, then I don't really know about that, but I suppose that things are developing generally pretty fast in many places.
Yeah, I think it is that who that gap of, if you're not motivated yourself to go and jump in and try lots of things, how do you get the rest of people up to scale? And I'm scared for you, Marcus, that by exposing that you have knowledge of this, you're going to get lots of emails after this meeting from people asking you for help. But I think, Simon, did you have your hand up first?
So yeah, it's actually a question for both Marcus and Sally. Obviously, the potential of iteratively using AI tools over almost all areas of the process of research are very compelling. But to what to what level are we also putting in the education for researchers? So, for instance, don't put your highly sensitive research data directly into ChatGPT, or make sure that you're using, if you do want to use a service on that, make sure you're using an enterprise client that guarantees that it is not sharing your data with others. Same goes for peer review. Be aware that if you just put someone's article into ChatGPT for some answers, you're potentially giving away IP that isn't your right to do so. So to what level are we actually investing in educating researchers about those gotchas that aren't immediately obvious?
Shall I jump? Shall I just?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess I think those are great questions, Simon, and I also think they're perhaps one of the easiest set to answer. So I think the answer is a lot of those particular issues are reasonably well known, and I think a lot of those issues are being dealt with different degrees of speed, I suppose, throughout a range of ecosystems. And I guess I come to this whole point, this whole issue, very much as someone who knows absolutely nothing technically at all. And one of the things that I have most noticed as someone who tries to keep up with this in a normal way, reading the trade press, yada, 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 is that a typical kind of writing around AI and research is that you'll be reading an article about someone setting out some principles, and sort of hidden in there will often be something that feels like, to me, the most remarkable bit, which they'll say, and of course I got it to do ABC and the results were completely ludicrous, right? And so part of the genre of this type of writing seems to be quite, it's the future. The way that technology is usually written, is often written about as a kind of, it's exciting, it's new, aren't we cool? And yet hidden in that kind of material can often be stuff that seems to me the most pertinent point, right? Is that people say, and I got it to write a biography of me and it was all completely full of rubbish, right? So to me, as someone who really can't discuss it on a particularly significant detail level, there are such obvious questions to do with, explainability and reproducibility that we need to do some more fundamental work, perhaps, before we start talking about some more technical fixes, I guess. And a lot of it, again, comes back to me banging my drum about sort of incentives and rewards. And we do need to incentivize people within the sector to develop more human interpretable models, to look at, to actually look at the errors that might exist in some of these models, to look at some of the, to write some reproducibility reports, because I do think there is a kind of gung-ho techno-futurism that happens, right? And it does seem to me, strikes me as someone who really doesn't understand this on a technical level, there's a lot of stuff that's blatantly erroneous, and I'm not sure why, we call it a hallucination, it's a mistake, why don't we say that? So there's just a slightly different type of answer, possibly.
Thank you. And Marcus, you wanted to chime in. And since we're talking about research security and risks associated with AI, could you also perhaps talk about some of the strategies that institutions can use to mitigate these risks?
Yeah, I'll try. And some of those points that you, Simon, raised are something that we have tried to think pretty much about, although we don't have perfect answers for those, but we try to educate our researchers about what we know about those risks in using AI, and we have available enterprise software versions, so that from a vendor where we trust them and their agreements and their commitments to us, and people can use those software, and the data that they put in there should be safe and not used for the education of their models, which, by the way, also enables us in our framework of the GDPR rules to also use them for teaching with students. But yeah, it's really important for them to know that they can't use a public chatbot, just as, let's say, a public ChatGPT, to put some data that should be secure into that. And I'm not sure that all people know that well, and we are just trying to communicate about that, and establishing workshops for researchers, and training people who are starting their work toward their PhD, but also, in a sense, the older category of researchers might be even in more jeopardy, because some of those people aren't kind of naturally not all of them are attuned to this, and not all of them might realize that if they insert data into a public non-enterprise version of a software, then they might be compromising some data that actually should be kept in a secure location. That's one thing. Another bigger thing is this, that that if people would be tempted to use directly some significant part from text coming directly as an output from a bot, let's say several sentences or even more, I understand that the rules may still vary pretty much between outlets and certainly between fields of research. Some claim to me that in computer science there might be fairly good conferences where it might be okay to put even one full page worth of AI-produced text into that. I'm a little bit suspicious about that. I'm not sure, but in many of the best journals in our areas, where our main areas are engineering and science and business, the top journals quite often seem to be quite conservative indeed about whether you can put some AI-produced text into your submission, and those instructions could be easily interpreted so that you could put maybe 1 or 2 or 3 sentences, but beyond that it's going to be difficult, and there's no guarantee really that the sentences suggested to you by the AI wouldn't be copied too directly from something that has been published already. And it's also possible that if you're doing, let's say, a literature review of some really common topic, and together with hundreds or thousands of researchers roughly at the same time around the world, AI might be giving you a fairly same or very same paragraph for the literature review for, let's say, 10 researchers at the same time. And what if they end up publishing, or a majority at least of them end up publishing that paragraph? It's going to look like to many people like that at least 9 people plagiarized the other people, even though they didn't really copy anything from anywhere, but the software did it kind of for them and multiplied the same thing. So there's this impression of plagiarism, and one of my theories is that it may turn out so that if the research ethics will turn out so that it's going to be allowed to use AI for purposes such as improving the readability of text that you have once already written yourself, then how to take care of this, that it's not going to kind of come up also elsewhere in the world. The same text might be something like that. There's automatic checking of that when somebody submits to a conference and journal, and also checking again at the point of time when a journal is about to publish, that nobody published it yet. And I wouldn't be surprised if some protocol like that might actually emerge. Let's see about that, but it's kind of an interesting thing. And one important challenge that we have now is that we are really trying to put a lot of, and increasingly more of, emphasis in communicating a lot to our scholars at our university about that they would be knowledgeable of these risks that there are, and so that there wouldn't be any kind of research ethical lapses where people very often easily, I might imagine, would not have realized at all that they did something that would be forbidden, or that they compromised data that should be proprietary.
Yeah, I guess we could talk about this a lot longer than we have time for, but we'll move on to addressing concerns over funding to strengthen research collaboration. So I wanted to start with, how can we create more equitable funding models that encourage sustainable and high impact research, and also incentivize transparency and accountability in collaborative research projects? I'll throw that open to the entire panel.
Just to start us off while people are thinking, I think with all things academia, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes. In a world where we wanted to move towards open access, and we have some great open access publishers who have solved for getting as many article processing charges as possible, we end up with lots more publications and lots of solid publications, but the incentive is for more APCs. We end up with more APCs, and we see gold open access going like this and green open access like this. So I think if we're looking at funding models, it will be reverse engineered, and we will see ways in which different actors will look to work towards those incentives. That said, I hope that somebody's had time to think about this now, and I don't really have an answer for how to do it. I just have a concern that everything is gameable.
I guess to me, it really depends what sort of collaboration we're talking about. And I mean, in terms of international collaboration, I think we are really at a pincer moment between, on the one hand, obviously, we've heard already that citations go up with international collaboration. There's a huge push for open research, as we've talked about, science diplomacy, etc., international student recruitment, so on the one hand, which is all pushing us towards international competitiveness and collaboration. And on the other hand, we have the securitization of research. And I think it is certainly the case that in terms of international collaboration, the geopolitics that we are all experiencing really are moving a lot faster than researchers and institutions have support. And so to me, I think there is a legitimate debate, obviously, to be had between the relationship between various conceptions of national security, regional security on the one hand, and academic freedom and institutional autonomy on the other. And I think those debates must happen. But I don't think they should start from the position of science and research being pure and unpolitical, right? Because all science and research is done within the social and political context. I do think it is the case that currently the international collaborative arena is genuinely quite a fraught one for us, right, as a set of institutions. And while we have had a lot of funding to pursue those collaborations, we are now in a situation in which there are lots of questions being asked. And my main concern is that if we are, as a system, I think there are some systems that are providing excellent guidance and support to their research communities so that people can understand how to make those risk assessments, as it were, in terms of international collaboration. There are other ecosystems in which we are still trading in sort of bromides, right? And which leaves institutions in particular very vulnerable. And I think the problem with that is that there will be a bit of a chilling effect on international collaboration, because these are big, scary words, right? Like there's espionage, blah, blah, blah. Like it's frightening, right? We're not usually in that milieu. And so what we will experience is a chilling effect, but that effect will not be experienced the same, right? So I think there is differential effects of this kind of vagueness. I think if you are a young, minoritized female researcher, you will probably experience this sort of milieu as potentially more chilling than if you are a senior male professor. So I think we do need to look at providing institutions and researchers with something a little bit more concrete so that their risk appetite can be appropriately and legitimately aligned. So I think in terms of international collaboration, we are at a very interesting and unusual point in the history of research, really.
Okay, Simon?
I'm just using my prerogative because I really want to ask a question of Marcus on this, particularly with AI. So obviously one of the things we would like to see more is industry collaboration. But as the dollars and the money around AI increases, has there been a move for AI research to go a bit more dark, to pull back from being as open, to become more part of companies than research institutions?
Do you mean that by money that companies might have been providing to universities, they wouldn't be doing that so much any longer and wanting to take things back in-house?
I think so. And whereas they would have been more happy to publish the findings of their research and their code maybe 3 years ago on the path to AI, suddenly that's not being shared. Suddenly that's being treated as a part of a commodity and a resource and a competitive advantage.
I don't know so closely about that, but that might make sense because they might have thought about ways that they could actually develop as proprietary, at least work processes, where they might be able to retain a competitive advantage for some time, like 2 years, for example, which might be a really long time in this hugely fast progression of AI in society and in business too. So it would make sense. I haven't thought about that a lot, but I think it would make certainly a lot of sense that some of those who think that they have come up with a good recipe wouldn't want to give it out fast. If that
Yeah, I just think
answers you.
it's interesting as we were talking about progress towards open. We're also experiencing in certain areas tides the other way, not just in security, but in high value technical advantages as well.
I think there's going to be questions as well. There already is questions. I'm going to keep this brief because I know we might have time for a question at the end from the audience. Thank you for your questions. But I think this is you nailed it on the head there, Simon, with the idea that there is, on the grand scheme of things, what is AI doing for us? If it's going to be more transformative than the internet, then we are going to have world advances, humanity advances because of AI. And I think so that they'll get away with a lot of stuff, the private companies, if they help do that, which they seem to be doing. And then on the other hand, I'm an open research advocate and a technological optimist. And I think going back to Sally's points about how do we enable people to have the right information to make the right decisions with how they work, the power of open research and the power of open metadata. And we see this with our sister organization Dimensions, which has a way in which you can see networks to see who your researchers are working with and perhaps alert them earlier on that they are not necessarily working with the appropriate folks for whatever reasons which they may not know about. I think by having all of the open information, you can make those decisions. And I think ultimately we'll come back around to that with AI, where we say, we don't trust it unless the models are open. We don't trust it unless the data is open. But in the short term, I think we'll be like, we'll let you get away with it if you keep, curing cancer or whatever it is you're doing.
Thank you. On that note, we'll take a question from the audience, which is similar to what we were discussing. Can AI be suitable and helpful for all types of research methodology?
Research methodology.
Methodology, yes.
Well, I think it probably varies, because I was just thinking about this, and if I would, for example, want to do statistical research with AI, I personally, with my skills, and maybe nobody, at least I wouldn't be happy at doing that, because I couldn't really trust at all that what is it that the AI actually did to it. So I couldn't trust, even if I gave it. It depends on the model, but if I tried to give it really strict instructions that use precisely this and this regression model, for example, that typically wouldn't make me trusting enough that it actually did just what I asked it. So AI, the model still to me is pretty much a black box, so that that's one reason why I would use it definitely mostly as a tool of ideating, not as a tool to whose output I would trust as such. So I typically wouldn't be using it for statistical research, but that may depend. I don't know about specialist programs that there may be for statistics that might have some useful AI features in them. But I wouldn't do it. But some of my colleagues are using it for doing so-called coding for some of their qualitative interview data. And that's certainly something where AI can make things a lot faster. AI can code some parts of transcribed interviews, and the researcher should typically check all of that. But the point is that the AI would have made that job a lot faster by starting it off, and then the researcher starts from a later point in that. And that is at least one idea where it could really do a lot in terms of saving time.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, so we'll take one more question, which is there a need for a universal policy framework for ensuring the responsible use of AI in research?
Yes.
Please elaborate.
I think it's yes and no, because Mark mentioned, AI is as significant, as important as the internet. In some ways, a nice thought experiment to say is, could you articulate a responsible use of the internet? And you can in some ways, and you can in other ways, isn't it? It's so pervasive that a universal policy is going to be hard. But Marcus, you're probably going to get the last word, which seems appropriate on this.
Well, policies are needed, and mostly for the viewpoint that, and for the reason that some scholars are just searching for advice, and that's why we are doing workshops to help them learn about responsible and effective use of AI, and learning everybody to learn more about how the kind of gray areas of research ethics are developing, because those are interesting ones. I personally would hope that using AI for things such as making already written text to have better readability would be approved. But before they are approved, then I probably would be very hesitant in doing that unless there would be clear rules on how to do that. So can you remind? I have a little bit of fever actually. Could you remind what was the question? I seem to have lost the thread of the thought.
Yeah, it's about the need for a universal policy framework on the use of AI.
Yeah. So the one good thing is that now that I suppose quite many universities might not have a framework and guidelines, the good thing is that many people have a target journal or one target and a secondary target journal. So the good thing is that really many journals and their publishers do have AI guidelines. And in our university, for example, we don't have a university-wide guideline, but we are not in a terrible hurry because we are just communicating quickly to people that please check the guidelines of high-quality publishers, because they tend to be fairly strict, it seems, typically, and I don't imagine that our own policy would be stricter than that. So in that sense, it seems that we are not in a huge hurry.
Thank you. We have more interesting questions from the audience, but apologies, we are out of time. So thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you to all our panelists for making this an interesting and engaging conversation. We will share the recording of this webinar and a post-event summary article with all the participants in the coming days. Thank you very much and goodbye.